All right, buckle up everyone, because today we're going to be doing a deep dive into the world of aerial firefighting.
Yeah, we're going to be covering everything from the different types of aircraft they use to the split-second decisions they have to make up there, and the specialized tactics they use to combat those massive infernos.
I'm excited to dig in. So maybe let's start at the very beginning. How do these aerial firefighting missions even get off the ground?
Well, I mean, it's not like someone sees a puff of smoke and they scramble the whole fleet, right?
Right, what triggers that initial response?
It all starts with detection. You've got satellites constantly scanning the Earth, lookout towers staffed with, people with really sharp eyes.
So technology and good old-fashioned human observation.
Exactly. And then, of course, you have reports from people on the ground, hikers, people living in remote areas.
So it's like a network of eyes on the lookout.
That's a good way to put it. And then once a fire is spotted, it's up to the incident commanders to assess the situation.
Incident commanders, now those are the folks on the ground who are calling the shots, right?
Exactly. They have to evaluate the fire's size, how intensely it's burning, the terrain, the weather, all these different factors come into play.
So they're kind of like the generals on the battlefield making those strategic decisions.
That's a perfect analogy. And based on their assessment, they decide if they need to call in aerial support.
And I imagine the kind of support they need depends on the specifics of each fire, right?
Oh, absolutely. You might need helicopters for those really precise drops in tricky spots, or you might need those huge air tankers to blanket a whole area with retardant.
So it's not just a one-size-fits-all approach.
Nope, not at all. Every fire is different. Every situation is unique.
That makes sense. So once they've decided to bring in aerial support, what does that actually look like? I mean, I imagine it must be a pretty carefully coordinated dance in the sky with all those different aircraft working together.
It's a well-oiled machine, that's for sure. You've got your helicopters, your fixed-wing aircraft, all playing their specific roles.
Right, and then there are the air attack planes.
They're like the air traffic controllers of the whole operation. They're up there coordinating everything, guiding the other aircraft, making sure everyone's flying safely in what can be, some pretty crazy conditions.
That sounds like a pretty high-pressure job.
You got it. They're monitoring the fire, they're directing traffic, they're keeping everyone safe.
Let's dive into the specifics. I mean, I'm picturing more than just your average Cessna out there tackling these raging infernos, right?
Oh, yeah. You need some serious firepower to go up against a wildfire. We're talking about some specialized machines.
All right, well, lay it on me. What kind of flying machines are we talking about here?
Well, let's start with the fixed-wing stars of the show. One that always captures the imagination is the Bombardier CL-415, nicknamed the Super Scooper.
Oh, yeah, I've seen videos of that one. The one that can land on water, right?
That's the one. This thing is amazing. It can swoop down and scoop up thousands of gallons of water from a lake or even the ocean in just seconds, and then it takes off again to deliver its payload directly onto the fire.
Wow. It's like a giant flying water bucket.
Pretty much. But
Yeah.
then, you've got those massive wildfires that stretch for miles and miles.
Yeah, I can't imagine those little scoopers are going to cut it for those megafires.
You're right. That's when they bring in the big guns. I'm talking about the Lockheed C-130 Hercules and the DC-10 air tanker.
Those are those massive planes.
Yep. They were originally military and passenger planes, but they've been converted into these giant flying tankers that can carry huge amounts of fire retardant.
That's wild. I bet those things are a sight to behold. How much retardant can they even carry?
Well, the DC-10 air tanker, for example, can hold something like 12,000 gallons.
12,000 gallons. That's more than my entire house.
It's a lot of firepower. But of course, you also have those fires in really hard-to-reach places, canyons, mountainsides.
Yeah, I can't imagine those massive tankers can maneuver in tight spaces.
Exactly. That's where they bring in the single-engine air tankers, or seats. They're smaller and more nimble, perfect for targeted drops in those tricky areas.
So it's like having a whole team of specialists, each with their own unique skills and strengths.
Exactly. And it's not just about the fixed-wing aircraft either. Helicopters play a huge role in aerial firefighting as well.
Okay, let's talk about the helicopter heroes then. What kind of choppers are we dealing with here?
Well, one of the workhorses is the Sikorsky S-64 Sky Crane. It's essentially a flying crane,
I've seen pictures of those. They look intense.
Yeah, they can be outfitted with either big tanks or buckets, which gives them a lot of flexibility.
So they can deliver water or retardant, depending on what's needed.
Exactly. Pinpoint accuracy, too. And then there's the Bell 412, which is a little smaller than the Sky Crane, but still packs a punch. It's kind of a jack of all trades, really.
So what do they use those for?
They use them for everything from transporting firefighters and equipment to, making water drops.
Real multitasker.
Yep. And then, of course, you have the Chinook CH-47, which is another heavy lifter. It can carry massive payloads of water or retardant.
It sounds like they've got a tool for every job. But with all this talk about aircraft, we haven't even gotten into what they're actually dropping on these fires.
Yes, the materials themselves. That's a whole other fascinating aspect of aerial firefighting. And, it's not just about water.
I was going to say, I bet it's not. So let's dive into that next. What are they using to combat these infernos from the sky?
Well, water is still the most common, especially when they have a ready supply nearby.
Yeah, it makes sense.
I mean, they'll draw it from lakes, reservoirs, sometimes even the ocean.
Wow, so they really are turning those aircraft into giant water bombers.
Exactly. And while water might seem pretty basic, it's incredibly effective at cooling down those flames, reducing the intensity.
I can imagine. But I'm guessing there are some limitations to just using plain water.
You're right. For one thing, water can evaporate pretty quickly, especially in those super hot fires.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, sometimes it evaporates before it even hits the flames. And then another issue is that it doesn't always penetrate deep into the fuel.
The fuel, you mean like the burning vegetation?
Exactly, yeah. So it might not fully extinguish the fire.
So you need something with a little more staying power, I guess.
And that's where fire retardants come in. They're kind of a game changer in aerial firefighting.
Fire retardants. Okay. Now, those sound interesting. So what makes them so special?
Well, the most common type is this mixture of water, a chemical called ammonium phosphate, and then a red dye.
Red dye. Okay, that's got to be more than just for looks, right?
They're right. It's there for a very practical reason. It helps the pilots see where they've already dropped the retardant.
Okay, but what about that ammonium phosphate? What role does that play?
That's the key ingredient. That's what makes it a fire retardant.
Okay, I'm all ears. Break it down for me.
So when the retardant is dropped, the water evaporates, and you're left with this sticky residue of ammonium phosphate on the vegetation.
Okay, and that residue does what exactly?
It creates a fire-resistant barrier. It basically makes it much harder for the plant material to ignite and burn.
So it's not just about putting out existing flames, it's also about preventing the fire from spreading further.
Precisely. It's both a suppressant and a preventative measure.
Wow, that's amazing. It's like a double whammy.
Yeah, it really helps to slow down that fire's advance and give those ground crews a chance to, get in there and fight it.
I can see why it's a game changer. Now, I'm curious, are there any other, tricks of the trade when it comes to these materials they're dropping?
They also use foams and gels, which are kind of like, the special forces of fire suppression.
How do those work?
Well, foam is like water, but a lot thicker. It's mixed with a foaming agent that makes it more resistant to that evaporation we talked about. So it can penetrate deeper into the vegetation and really smother those flames.
So like giving water some extra firefighting muscle.
Exactly. Now, gels are a little different. They're really thick, almost like a jelly, and they stick to surfaces really well.
I'm picturing them as like a sticky fire blanket just coating everything.
Exactly. That's a great way to think about it. They can be dropped on structures or vegetation to create like a temporary fireproof barrier.
Wow, so many different tools in their arsenal. It's really fascinating.
It is, and choosing the right one for the job is a big part of what those incident commanders and air attack pilots do.
Yeah, it's a lot more strategic than I ever realized.
There's a lot of thought that goes into every mission. They're constantly analyzing the fire, considering the weather, the terrain, and of course, what resources they have available.
Right.
They've got a whole range of tactics they use depending on the situation.
Okay, so what are some of those aerial firefighting tactics? What are the different approaches they might take?
Well, sometimes the most effective approach is a direct attack.
Direct attack, so just hitting the flames head on.
Exactly. Dropping that water or retardant directly onto the fire to try and, knock it down as quickly as possible.
That sounds intense. I can't even imagine what that must be like for the pilots.
It takes some serious skill and nerves of steel. But then there's also the indirect attack, which is a little more strategic.
Okay, what's that all about?
So in an indirect attack, they're not aiming for the flames themselves, but rather they're dropping the retardant ahead of the fire's path.
So they're trying to cut it off, basically.
Exactly. Create a containment line and stop it from spreading any further.
Kind of like boxing it in.
Exactly. This far and no further.
I like it. Now, what about those ground crews that are out there, battling the fire on the front lines? How does aerial firefighting support them?
Oh, air support is crucial for those ground crews. They can cool down hotspots that are too dangerous for firefighters to approach directly.
I can imagine.
Or they can drop retardant around the area where the ground crews are working, creating a kind of safe zone.
So they're like a shield protecting those firefighters on the ground.
Pretty much, yeah. They play a huge role in keeping those ground crews safe and helping them do their job effectively.
It really is a team effort. Now, we've been talking about these large-scale fires, but what happens when a fire is just starting out? How do they handle that?
That's where the initial attack comes in. The goal here is to hit that fire hard and fast before it has a chance to really grow.
So kind of like a rapid response?
Exactly. They'll often send out air tankers or helicopters as soon as a fire is spotted.
Trying to put it out before it gets out of control.
Exactly. Either extinguish it completely or at least contain it until those ground crews can get there.
Smart thinking.
Mhm.
Now, what about those situations where the fire is threatening homes or communities? What do they do then?
That's when they shift into defensive operations. The priority becomes protecting lives and property.
Right, makes sense.
So they'll focus on creating fire breaks around communities, you know, dropping retardant to slow the fire's advance, and just trying to shield those structures from the heat.
It's amazing how they can adapt their tactics to all these different scenarios.
It really is impressive. But of
What?
course, all of this comes with its own set of challenges and risks.
Yeah, I bet. It sounds incredibly demanding.
It is. You're dealing with intense heat, smoke, unpredictable winds. It can be a very challenging environment to fly in.
So what are some of the biggest challenges they face? What makes it so difficult?
Well, one of the biggest is visibility. When you're
Oh.
flying through all that smoke and ash, it can be really tough to see where you're going. And then, of course, you have the flying conditions themselves, the heat, the turbulence, the unpredictable winds.
Yeah, sounds like they're battling the elements just as much as the flames.
Exactly. And then you have the limited capacity of the aircraft. I mean, they can only carry so much water or retardant per trip.
So they're constantly having to go back and reload.
Yeah, and sometimes they have to fly long distances to find a suitable water source.
It must be a logistical nightmare at times.
It definitely can be. And of course, you have the financial side of things, too. Aerial firefighting is an expensive operation.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
I mean, the aircraft themselves are costly to operate and maintain. The materials, the retardant, all of that adds up.
Yeah, I guess it's easy to forget that there's a huge financial investment involved in keeping our community safe from these fires.
It's a big undertaking for sure. But, despite all those challenges, we've seen some truly remarkable examples of aerial firefighting in action.
Absolutely. Some real heroism and incredible skill on display.
Yeah, there are countless stories that really highlight the impact of these efforts. I mean, think about the 2020 Australian bushfires, what they called the Black Summer.
Oh, yeah, those were devastating. I remember seeing those images on the news. It was heartbreaking.
It was a catastrophic event, and those fires were so massive that they had to bring in aerial support from all over the world.
Wow.
And the super scoopers, those CL-415s, were essential because they could just scoop up water from the ocean and keep making those drops.
They were like lifesavers, really.
They really were. And then there was that Fort McMurray wildfire in Canada back in 2016. That was another major one.
Oh, yeah, the one where they had to evacuate the whole city.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. And the aerial firefighters were working nonstop trying to protect the city, the oil sands facilities.
I can't even imagine the pressure they were under.
It must have been intense. The smoke, the heat, the constant back and forth, dropping water and retardant.
Yeah, just battling those relentless flames.
And then there's the campfire in California in 2018, which, sadly became the deadliest and most destructive wildfire in California's history.
That one was just tragic.
It was, and aerial firefighters were a huge part of the response, creating fire breaks, trying to protect those towns.
Really trying to slow that fire down and give people a chance to escape.
Exactly. And there are so many other examples from around the world, the Attica wildfires in Greece, the Yellowstone fires back in '88.
It's clear that aerial firefighting has had a huge impact on so many lives and communities.
It has. But, as we celebrate these successes, it's important to remember that there's a human cost to this profession as well.
Right. We can't forget about the risks these brave men and women face every day.
It's a dangerous job, and sadly, there have been many who've paid the ultimate price.
The statistics are pretty sobering, actually.
They are. Between 2000 and 2013, in the U.S. alone, there were 31 fatal aviation accidents related to wildland firefighting, 77 lives lost.
It's a stark reminder of the dangers they face every time they go up there.
They're putting their lives on the line to protect us. It's something we should never take for granted.
Absolutely. Their courage and dedication are truly inspiring. But, as we reflect on those risks, I think it's also important to look to the future. What's on the horizon for aerial firefighting.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a field that's constantly evolving, always looking for ways to improve.
So what are some of those advancements? What's the future of aerial firefighting looking like?
Well, one area that's really exciting is the use of drones. They're already being used for reconnaissance and mapping, but their role is expanding rapidly.
So they're like those air attack planes we talked about, but even more versatile.
Yeah, exactly. They can get into places that are too dangerous or difficult for those bigger aircraft.
So they're providing valuable intel to the firefighters on the ground and in the air.
Exactly. And as the technology gets better, we're going to see them taking on even more active roles.
Like what kind of things could we see drones doing in the future?
Well, imagine drones dropping, small amounts of water or retardant or acting as mobile sensors, detecting hot spots, monitoring fire behavior.
Wow, that would be a game changer.
It would. And then you have artificial intelligence, AI.
Oh yeah, AI's popping up everywhere these days, isn't it?
It is. And in aerial firefighting, it has huge potential. Think about AI algorithms analyzing all that data, weather patterns, terrain, fire behavior.
Okay, so they're using AI to predict how a fire might spread.
Exactly. And then they can use that information to make better decisions about, resource allocation, firefighting strategies.
So AI is basically helping them get ahead of the fire.
Yeah, it's like having a crystal ball, but, one that's based on science and data.
That's incredible. But what about the environmental impact of all of this? I mean, are there efforts to make aerial firefighting more sustainable?
Oh, absolutely. There's a big push to develop eco-friendly fire retardants.
Right, because those traditional ones, they can have some negative effects, right?
They can. So researchers are working hard to create retardants that are, biodegradable, less toxic.
So they break down naturally and don't harm the environment as much.
Exactly. It's a top priority for the future of this field.
That's great to hear. It sounds like the future of aerial firefighting is pretty bright, with all this technology and innovation happening.
It is. But along with those advancements, there's also a focus on improving training and safety measures.
Right, because at the end of the day, it's those pilots and crew members who are out there putting their lives on the line.
They're the most valuable resource we have. So they're doing things like joint exercises, bringing together pilots, ground crews, everyone involved.
So they can practice working together in those high-pressure situations.
Exactly. Communication, coordination, all of that is critical. And they're also using more advanced simulation technology in pilot training.
Oh, so they can practice those maneuvers and emergency procedures in a safe environment.
There's always a focus on improving safety protocols and equipment.
Right, making sure everything's up to par.
Yep. Stricter maintenance standards for the aircraft, better protective gear. They're doing everything they can to minimize those risks.
So I guess as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that aerial firefighting is a pretty incredible field.
It is. It's a testament to human ingenuity, courage, our ability to adapt and overcome those challenges.
We've covered so much today, from those air attack pilots to those ground crews battling those flames on the front lines.
It's been quite a journey exploring this world, hasn't it?
It has. So the next time you see a plane or helicopter flying over a wildfire, take a moment to appreciate those skilled and dedicated individuals on board.
They're the unsung heroes, protecting our communities and our planet from those destructive flames.
Well said. It's been a fascinating deep dive into the world of aerial firefighting.
And it's a reminder that while wildfires are a natural part of many ecosystems, we all have a role to play in preventing those catastrophic fires.
That's right. We need to be responsible, do our part to protect our communities and our environment.
Absolutely. It's a collective effort.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to wrap things up here. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of aerial firefighting.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and remember, knowledge is power.